So far, we've argued that values can help us to deal with the free rider problem and a host of other issues that I have argued that values can help us deal with the free rider problem and can effectively help us create social order. If we look at our diagram, values is in the bottom left-hand corner. It's an internal state. So we're going to be thinking about the macro, meso, and even micro level factors, the context that will shape our internal states. What is the situational mechanism that helps us create our values and internalize certain values? And of course, we're going to look at how the values eventually lead to individual action. So how do we develop our values? Well, there's an internalization process, and there's a great reading by Sigmund Freud in a book called Society and Its Discontents, Civilization and Its Discontents. And it's where Sigmund Freud, wrote a really excellent book where he lays out the internalization process. He explains that in situations of extreme dependence, we will develop our values. He offers 3 ways of looking at the human brain. There's the id aspect of the brain, the ego, and the superego. The id is our biological drive. So if you are an infant, maybe you want food, so you cry and you scream because you want food, you're hungry, or you're tired, so you cry and you scream, and it's your biological drive telling you that you're tired or you're hungry or something hurts. Well, what happens is the parent comes along, and the parent either gives the child, breast milk or formula or something, or the parent holds the child and puts the child to sleep. So the idea here is that you've got this biological drive, and you have the superego, which I call the super parent. The parent comes and fulfills that need. It gives the child food. And the child basically learns that it has a biological drive. In order to appease that biological drive, usually there's a social aspect that helps out. So the best way to sort of really explain this idea of id, ego, and superego is teenagers, especially teenage males, in my opinion. Teenage males they hit puberty, and they really want to have sex. They have a biological drive to have sex. Well, the superparent comes along, society, and society tells you it's not okay to grab a big stick, hit a woman over the head, or hit a man over the head, and try to have sex. It's not acceptable. So what do you have to do? You learn that there are rules to getting sex. You take somebody out to dinner, you talk to them, you tell them they look pretty, you tell them they're good looking, and eventually the ego is the thing that's mediating between the needs of society and the needs of the biology. And the ego is, the superego is basically our values, and the ego is the thing that's mediating between civilization's values, society's values, and your own biological drive. And you're internalizing that superego, that super parent, society telling you what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. The ego is mediating between civilization and biology, according to Freud. Freud is pretty critical of civilization. He argues that we're replacing the power of the individual with the power of the community. He argues that back in the day, individual liberty was at its greatest in the past. And as we have developed as a society, as a civilization, we have actually lost a lot of our freedom. We cannot do as we please. Free will is constrained by consequences. So according to Freud, individual liberty was no gift of civilization. We read in our political text, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Freud argues that civilization has greatly curbed our liberties. Again, if we go to our motivation spectrum, values is the idea that you have internalized the values of your community, whether it's your parents, your church, your school. You have totally internalized those ideas, And those ideas are extremely important. Now, if you think about the other side, you've got the selfish egoist who says, I am the most important thing in the world. Freud argued that situations of dependence can cause people to internalize values. So when I do this in class, I ask students, can you think of other situations of dependence that might cause people to internalize certain values? And how and why are the people dependent? Since I can't teach this course exactly as I teach it in class, I'm going to let you think about this for a couple of seconds, and then I'm going to give you the answer. Sociologists often talk about this idea of a total institution. An institution that takes care of you completely. You are completely dependent on it. One of the best total institutions that sociologists study is military boot camp. A lot of people in the military are completely dependent on the military when they're in boot camp. You don't go home and see your wife or your best friend or your girlfriend or your mom or your dad. You sleep there. They give you your food. They give you your clothing. They tell you how to eat, when to eat, whether you're allowed to eat. They tell you what you're doing minute to minute of the day. Total institutions that encompass your whole life, that take over every aspect of your existence. Number one, they're total. Number two, the people inside of them are dependent. If you want to stay, if you want to be a part of it, you have to do as they're told. And it's very important that for a young child early in life, 1, 2 years old, you're completely dependent on your parents and you internalize your parents' values because you're dependent on them. Similarly, total institutions like the military are also going to have a real impact on a person and help them internalize a different set of values. Prisons are other total institutions that will shape the values of a person. But again, as I said in the first part of this semester, when you think about prisons, a lot of prisoners are internalizing the values of the other prisoners because that's predominantly who they spend time with. So keep that in mind when you want to talk to people about the prison system. To summarize, Sigmund Freud argues that macro, meso, and micro situations of dependence have a situational mechanism. People desire love. We want to avoid punishment. Therefore, what we do is we transfer our aggression to the superego. We have developed a superego inside of our head that tells us right and wrong, appropriate, inappropriate. They help us evaluate ourselves and the world. The behavioral mechanism that leads to a certain behavior for Freud is guilt. If we don't live up to our own values, we will feel guilty. Therefore, the guilt will push you towards pro-social behavior. It'll push you towards doing what's right for society, putting society's desires before your own desires. Here is a graphic depiction of the theory. Situations of dependence leads to the development of the superego, which leads to pro-social behavior. The link between superego and pro-social behavior is guilt. If you do not live up to your super parent, your superego, you will feel guilty. So guilt keeps you working for society, for the group, for the community.